Let's start in San Francisco, where police there are requesting that their robots be allowed to use lethal force. So let's show you what we're talking about there. I'm really calling this baby Terminator, but it has serious life implications, if you will, because if they're allowed to use deadly force and the police say that this is the only way to go, the only route they have, they want approval from the city's Board of Supervisors to use these robots to, well, basically shoot to kill criminals where the risk of loss of life is imminent and outweighs any other force option available to the San Francisco Police Department. Now here's what we've learned. San Francisco Board of Supervisors, Aaron Peskin, initially pushed back on the use of the language in the draft and said, look, robots shall not be used as a use of force against any person. And so what did the police do after that? Well, they said, well, we'll just remove that language from the draft. Doesn't really solve the problem if you believe there is one. The 3-member Rules Committee, which Peskin chairs, then unanimously approved that draft, advanced it to the full Board of Supervisors for a vote on November 29th. Peskin excused his decision by claiming, quote, there could be scenarios where deployment of lethal force was the only option. Now in the draft, the purpose reads in part, nationwide violent offenders outgun law enforcement and high-powered weapons continue to be the weapon of choice for violent offenders confronting law enforcement and innocent civilians. During large critical incidents, active shooter or incidents where an armed suspect is threatening the public or officers, where there may be a need to defeat body armor to be used to effectively control a scene with increased distance between officer and subject, allowing more time to deploy other force options. Now the police force currently maintains a dozen fully functional remote controlled robots, which are typically used for area inspections, bomb disposal. We've seen those scenarios go down. While San Francisco has never explicitly allowed for robots to take human lives, lethal autonomous weapons, or laws as they're called, are increasingly common in modern warfare. David, I don't know if robots can make us safer. And again, I believe these are baby Terminators and they're gonna have serious life altering or maybe deadly consequences. What say you?
Well, I mean, I get the intention, and as you mentioned, yes, we've all seen in bomb situations where a robot comes and either shoots the bomb or detonates it, and it's the worst that happens is the robot gets destroyed. But that's an inanimate object. When you're talking about human beings, I just get really uncomfortable with the idea that we're going to send some sort of robot, some sort of device to interact with somebody who might say be willing to put their hands up or might be willing to surrender depending on how they're spoken to. And the problem that we always have with these situations, but I can, and look, I can still understand a situation where, okay, yeah, somebody is in a barricaded building and they're firing and there's no hope and he's shooting a bunch of people. Sure, send in whatever you can send to try to put that person down. But that doesn't happen very often. And what always seems to happen in these situations is that there's a total lack of transparency. But what is the training? What are the protocols? And are there going to be certain guardrails to make sure that if somebody is giving up or surrendering, that that is taken into account as opposed to a robot that just sees it's got a shot and opens fire?
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, I was talking to some of my friends earlier about this story, and somebody said, well, listen, police make mistakes, maybe robots will make less. Robots are colorblind. I think that, anytime human beings program robots, Terminators, that bias creeps in. But what do you think about that?
Well, there is something to it. I mean, a good analogy would be the drones, right? The UAVs that our military pilots control, say from California or Texas, and they're flying around the Middle East and they see a target and they open fire. And if that target happens to be, I don't know, a school building instead of an arms depot, a lot of women and children get killed. And whose fault is that? Is it the drone's fault? Is it the military's fault? And so there's an institutional lack of responsibility. There's a disconnect. And I get the idea that sure, you want to protect the lives of the people who might be in harm's way. But there has to be some accountability. There has to be somebody, there's got to be a level of responsibility. If it's the person controlling the robot, controlling the drone, whatever the object is, that person still needs to be held accountable for the decisions that they make. And whoever programs the robot or decides what sort of situations will trigger the robot, there has to be some level of accountability. And that's where I'm so troubled by all this. It's not the robot per se that I'm so worried about. It's the person who is programming it, controlling it, because now they're at a distance from all this, and they have an opportunity to now say if something goes wrong, well, that wasn't me, that was the robot that shot the person who was surrendering. And it becomes much more difficult in sort of the chain of custody of responsibility to pin any blame or responsibility on an actual human being. And we need to have accountability in order to make sure that innocent people don't get killed.
Yeah, and is the robot gonna be able to, send a message that, well, I felt threatened? So this is why I acted. The whole thing is really scary, and the fact that it got pushed through so easily to go up for a vote is very, very concerning. There is more. These autonomous offensive systems such as UAVs, combat drones have been used for years, but have always required a human in the loop. So that's kind of what you're talking about there, to bear the responsibility of actually firing the weapons. But now the SFPD, the same department that regularly costs the city six-figure settlements for its excessive use of force and actively opposes investigations into its affinity for baton-based beatings, well, wants to wield that same life and death power over San Francisco's civilians. It is a story that, well, needs a lot more of a deep dive, if you will.